welcome to this quickfire Q&A with the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce on the implications of the conflict in Ukraine for local businesses. I'm Henrietta Brealey, Chief Executive of the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. The human impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been huge, and I know the thoughts of those watching will be very much with the people of Ukraine. And while only a small minority of businesses trade directly with Russia or Ukraine, given the very high-profile nature of this conflict, the Chamber are, of course, working to connect our members to the latest intelligence on the emerging situation and support them in unpicking some of those wider implications for local businesses. In this video, we're going to be talking about one aspect that has been referenced quite a few times in media coverage, the implications of the conflict for energy security and energy prices. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Steve McCabe, Associate Professor at the Institute of Design, Economic Acceleration and Sustainability at Birmingham City University. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Henrietta. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us during what I'm sure is a very busy time for you, given your area of expertise. I wondered if you'd like to start by just telling us a little bit about what you see as those immediate implications of that Russia-Ukraine conflict on the energy situation in the UK.
Well, just to start off, I'm always reminded of something Neville Chamberlain, of course, from the great Chamberlain family of this area. And he said when Germany invaded the Sudetenland back in the 1930s, which was a sort of prelude to Second World War, about the sort of difficulty of faraway wars amongst people that we know very little about. And to a very large extent, we've known about the Ukraine because it's kind of been bubbling along because, of course, Russia has had designs upon Ukraine for quite a while, and indeed invaded the Crimea back in 2014. Now, of course, conflicts in sort of other parts of the world, they're nothing new. Why is this sort of having such a big impact? Well, quite clearly, you mentioned sort of the human tragedy that is resulting in, and it's absolutely sort of dreadful for the, sort of those involved. But more particularly, what we have to recognize is that Russia, it's a huge country. I mean, it covers umpteen time zones. Anybody who's ever been to Russia will sort of attest to sort of the difficulty of getting across. But what Russia does have is huge natural resources, including, lo and behold, natural gas and oil. Indeed, I would claim to remember the last great oil crisis in the 1970s. That was caused by sort of conflict in the Middle East. Now, our reliance on oil has shifted, and of course we did actually have sort of North Sea oil at that point, and we use a lot more gas. We're not quite as reliant on gas as is the case in Central Europe. But nonetheless, what does then happen is that we're sort of impacted by the wholesale prices, which of course I've been sort of watching in the last week or so, and they've kind of shot up. So we're seeing record levels for sort of oil and gas. And of course, just to sort of finish off, I don't need to tell you that even before the Ukraine crisis, we'd seen sort of prices going up very rapidly because Ofgem, which of course is the sort of regulator for the energy market, had put up sort of the wholesale price of energy by a whopping great 54%. And we had hoped that sort of a bit of stability over the sort of summer period might result in those coming down, because just to sort of warn people that there will be, or domestic users certainly, there will be another sort of review of the price cap before it'll be capped in August, when traditionally energy prices tend to be lower. But of course, I put the emphasis on the traditionally, because of course, obviously we're in the tail end of summer, we hope, and we don't have to sort of have the heating on, and demand then sort of reduces. What, of course, the Ukraine crisis has done, it'll probably mean that we'll still see energy prices remaining high in the coming months. And as I say, we'll expect to pay more domestically and, of course, commercially. I mean, commercial users, as I probably don't need to sort of to tell people listening in, that they don't get the benefit of the price cap. They have to pay whatever the going rate is, and energy costs are a sort of major cost for a lot of businesses at the moment.
So really, as you say, sort of exacerbating that existing issue that we're already seeing with high energy prices, and perhaps sustaining that energy crisis far longer than perhaps would have happened otherwise. As you say, I know there's many businesses concerned about the rising cost of energy, whether they're in what we traditionally think of as energy intensive industries, or even in the likes of hospitality, for instance, where actually there's a heck of a lot of lights, heck of a lot of heating, and a heck of a lot of machines running, from dishwashers to cookers all day, every day. So I know there's a lot of businesses already looking at that. Is there anything you'd advise businesses to think about or consider bearing in mind with these implications?
Well, at the risk of sort of sounding like I'm trying to come on here and flog my books, which I'm not. I was involved in writing 2 books last year, one on the green economy and one on green manufacturing. What came out of that loud and clear was the sort of the energy is the sort of it's the big cost to everyone. And of course, as we know, we're hearing a lot about sort of green energy. But of course, the sort of the economics of sort of that transition are not inconsiderable, both for sort of domestic and commercial users. I would suggest that, like the sort of the energy crisis in the 1970s, what will happen is that sort of the review that people will probably think about carrying out, there'll be a greater sort of catalyst towards making that the move towards greener sort of forms of energy, or sort of the way in which you can actually more particularly save energy, because of course we can, you know, as we were told back again when I was a child growing up in the 70s, turn lights off and to sort of use things more sparingly, because perhaps we tend to sort of be very complacent. So I think that's the sort of the big issue. But of course, the other thing is, if we can buy equipment that is much more sort of efficient in terms of its usage, then of course that helps to sort of contribute. Because of course, as I say, we're going to be into sort of, I think, a crisis, or which will lead to the transition. The two will sort of go side by side for, I don't know, many months, I suspect, and probably years.
So really tipping that balance for businesses that might have been starting to think about this or have plans in the future, to really bring forward those plans to invest in greener energy, more efficient machinery, as you say, and other solutions to reduce that energy consumption. Is there anything, thinking longer term, that you would recommend businesses consider or be aware of, or more broadly within the Russian-Ukraine crisis, that you think it's worth putting on businesses' radar at this time?
Well, I mean, the other thing is that let's not sort of, I mean, disregard the energy. Of course, that's the sort of the big one. But of course, there are going to be a lot of other sort of tailwinds that sort of come from this, because of course, yeah, both Russia, which of course is a huge country, and Ukraine, which of course is not a small country either. It's about the size of France. Yeah, they're responsible for producing a lot of sort of raw materials, which, dare I say, if the sort of sanctions really start to bite, and we don't know how this will sort of end, but it's not looking good at the moment. So we have to sort of fear for the worst, that sort of Russia, if it comes under sort of strain, it may decide to sort of to engage in sort of counteraction and cut off the supply of lots of things. So and raw materials, including aluminium and copper, and platinum, all of these, you know, there are a whole range of sort of things that Russia is responsible for exporting, which of course feed into the supply chains. So I think businesses will probably have to start thinking about the sort of the resilience. And indeed, I was at a sort of local manufacturer a couple of weeks ago, and indeed that was what the sort of his view was. I mean, he was already starting to think about the fact that if you're not able to get hold of sort of the precious metals that you can use, you need to start thinking about sort of an alternative, so that there may be disruption. You know, I think, dare I say, one of the things that perhaps we can all say we've been guilty of is maybe sort of complacency. Again, when I grew up, the great threat came from sort of what was then the Soviet Union, with the fall of sort of that particular empire, and sort of trading with Russia, we've got used to sort of to a ready supply of these materials. If they're suddenly cut off, it doesn't mean to say we don't produce. We just have to find other methods of doing it. I mean, what I would sort of say, just as a kind of, you know, that this is, if you like, the sort of the silver lining, so the big clouds that we can sort of see, you know, up ahead, is that sort of times of crisis are again the catalyst for sort of ingenuity in innovation. So we may think about sort of new ways of doing things, and the sort of the ideas that are kind of, you know, been fermenting for a while, they may become the sort of the great things, that sort of innovations that we become commonplace in the sort of the years to come. So I think, you know, unfortunately, wars are sort of very good at doing that, but we wouldn't want to go through that the experience if we could avoid it. But unfortunately, we sometimes have to.
And certainly the pandemic has brought about a whole lot of business innovation in its own right, as well as global supply chain disruption. So it does sound like it will be a continuance of those sorts of trends, but in new ways, and perhaps affecting different sorts of supplies of raw materials to what we've seen over the last couple of years. That same piece of businesses being very conscious of their supply chain, where things are coming from, what they're using, and what alternatives might be available. Sounds like it's going to be a continuing theme throughout the coming years, should we say. Is there anything?
Well, I was going to say, sorry. So, I mean, of course, quite clearly, homeworking, which, yeah, dare I say it, when I was teaching sort of management strategy 25 years ago, was being talked about as the sort of the future. But yeah, a lot of organisations had never really sort of, taken sort of the leap that was required to do that. So it was kind of seen as a nice to have, but it doesn't work for us, if you like. Of course, the pandemic, it turned everything upside down. So therefore, of course, that homeworking works well for those that it suits, which of course has sliced the population. I appreciate, of course, if you're sort of working in a factory, you can't produce things at home, but dare I say, for many who, of course, are office based, it's fine. So of course, what it does do, the advantage of that is it reduces the sort of the energy sort of consumption. And of course, the need for office space, but for organisations that used to traditionally be office-based, what it does do, of course, it means, of course, we have to sort of take the sort of the hit on that one. And what's absolutely essential is, of course, to keep the power going. So, I mentioned earlier on power cuts in the 1970s. That would be sort of devastating in terms of home working and our ability to communicate with one another in the way that we're doing now.
Absolutely. Everything is connected now, isn't it? So it's a very different world. Is there anything you would like to conclude with as sort of key messages to the business community, final thoughts and reflections?
Well, I mean, the difficulty is it's easy to be pessimistic, and it's the point is that we've been through sort of dreadful times before. Clearly, I'm not old enough to remember the Second World War, but I am the previous generation. That they got through that with all the sort of the suffering that was required, and a better world emerged. Dare I say, we've been through sort of more recent crises, and interesting things happen. Obviously, of course, that's not to sort of take away from the sort of the suffering we see on our TV screens. Yeah, there will be better times ahead. It's just the sort of question of sort of holding a nerve, hoping for the best, and trusting in those people who take policy decisions that they're doing the right things that will sort of maintain the sort of supply chains as best they can. And as I said earlier on, looking at sort of the innovation and creativity, which can create sort of new opportunities.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for taking the time to share your expertise today. And I know all of our chamber members, as you'd expect, will be right there with you from the chamber throughout whatever this latest crisis may or may not bring, to keep you informed about the latest developments. And if you do have any unanswered questions or concerns, please do keep in touch via your relationship managers, and we'll either produce more content such as this to answer key questions, or pick up key messages for that lobbying side of things. Stephen, you mentioned the importance of policymakers making the right decisions at this time, and will continue to be at the heart of communicating business views up to those in charge to make sure they are heard loud and clear as we navigate this latest challenge after a couple of years of change. Thank you again, Stephen. I look forward to seeing you probably on a future Q&A.
Let's hope so.